It's fair to say that communication has changed more in the past 20 or so years than it has in the previous 200 years. And there's been, as a result, a lot of mistakes made. The biggest problem I think we have now across the world is that businesses see digital communication as a way of reducing cost, not as a way of increasing engagement. And when cost reduction is the primary driver, rather than customer engagement, customer experience can suffer.
Welcome to the Pantrium podcast. Here, there's no fluff and no sales pitches, just real conversations. I'm your host, Kristensen, and at Pantrium, we bring together bold and curious founders and leaders to share their stories, their lessons they have learned, and the hard truth behind their success. We are all about challenging the status quo and explore fresh perspectives while focusing on what really matters: people. If you're craving deeper conversations, you're in the right space. So let's dive in. Andrew, thank you so much for joining the Pantrium podcast. I have been looking forward to this dialogue. We sat together a couple of weeks ago to discuss topics for today, and since then I've just been eager to introduce you to the viewers and listeners. As you know, the first question I ask all my guests is what's their fun fact, for us to get a sense of who they are as individuals, as people. So without further ado, Andrew, what's your fun fact?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Stevens. I am Head of Enterprise Digital Product Marketing and Portfolio Strategy at Quadient. My fun fact's a tricky one because I've always described my entire life as one long accidental after dinner speech. There are so many bizarre situations I've found myself in. Most of them can't be broadcast, at least not with a mixed audience. So probably the safest one would be that I used to be a musician. I used to be a trumpet player, a cornet player, and I once played a concert to 40 million people around the world, live, broadcast on TV. Wow. And in the largest arena in the UK. Only the event organizers got the timings a little bit wrong. So while it looked like it was an amazing event, they forgot to open the doors and let the public in. So we played to 40 million people around the world and nobody live.
And nobody in
and they
person.
hid the whole thing. Yeah. Nope, they hid the whole thing through very clever camera angles. And then it looked incredibly impressive, and only we knew at the time that they'd made an incredible mistake, and all the people that had come in for this big event got to come in afterwards and sit in their seats. Nothing happened. We'd already left.
Bye. You don't want to be those event organizers, that's for sure.
Mistakes can happen for everybody, and the important thing for them was the camera angles covered it up.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good little tiny bridge into today's session with regards to, things happen, things can go wrong, and things never really turn out as you expect. We had our own little technical issue before this session today. So again, like, how do you recover from that, and how do you learn and pivot from those sessions? So let's dive into today's conversation, Andrew. And the first thing I wanted to hear a bit more about is your own career journey, and some of those challenges you've seen yourself through that career journey and how you've overcome them.
Sure. My career journey's, again, some of it's accidental. I qualified with a degree in law, and then went from there to work in IT. I worked on the graduate training scheme at HSBC Group, and I learned to be a programmer from there. And I built my career first being members of teams, then leading teams in IT, moving from IT to international IT, and from international IT onwards into say, well, how could I work to support people in understanding IT better, not being in IT? And that eventually led me over to Quadient as a technology company, where we lead the world in helping organizations to connect better with their customers, both in hardware and in software form. And I'm in the software side of things there. So it's sort of been one long progression. Ultimately, it started with a passion for caring about people and caring about customers. And that I ended up being positioned in a customer communications team at HSBC in IT, building a statementing system, and the whole thing grew from there. Ending up moving into more general communications, into customer experience, and then moving to one of the world's leaders and really thought leaders when it comes to customer experience and how you connect with those customers. Very difficult to sort of say that I planned to do all of this, but it's something that I've really enjoyed the entire time because it's something that I'm genuinely passionate about, almost to the point of being overly enthusiastic about it at times, and evangelical about things. But it's just something that I do truly care about.
When you say you really care about it and it excites you and you get enthusiastic and so on, what's that thing that you feel like are really purposeful, or what is an example of a situation where you are so happy afterwards?
Yeah, I guess there's many situations. Probably the most recent one would be here at Quadient, where we've developed a full new solution that helps people to design and manage their personalized communications across the whole customer lifecycle. And being able to hear from customers where they say, we just couldn't do what we do today with our customers, and we couldn't engage with them in the right way without your software. Is a great feeling where you say, yeah, we've done a good job there. We haven't just helped somebody to make more money, we've helped them to be a sustainable difference, to create that sustainable difference and really to move them ahead of their competitors, because previously they would have had to say, let's take it to the silliest degree, but still saying dear customer, and then sending something that's very static on a channel that might be outdated to their customers. Now they can really engage with customers and connect with them at the place that the customer wants to be connected with. That only ever helps both parties. You put the customer first, and then as a result, the customer wants to do more business with you. They want to care more about you in the same way that you care about them. Mm-hmm. So yeah, our software platform, Inspire Evolve, that does that, that we built very recently. That's probably a great example of that. People that just couldn't do something beforehand that are now able to engage better.
So tell me about this a little bit more. How did you discover that there was a need, and how did you collaborate with your customers? Can you tell me a little bit more about that journey to get to the point where the software is there and supports their needs today, but also perhaps for tomorrow? So how did you go about that?
Well, we've always sold the Rolls-Royce of communication platforms. We call it Inspire Flex, and it's a full enterprise level solution. So we've always had a huge amount of customers that we can call on for advice, and we really care about the fact that we can go out and get that information from them. It's not just us throwing things at them. We work with them. And one of the things that we started to hear was that while Inspire Flex is undoubtedly phenomenal for large enterprises, we were getting more of feedback saying, look, we just want something that can be run without a large team, without the need for the whole company to transform at the same time. And that means building things in a slightly different way. It means looking at a simpler entry point. It means looking at a single line of business that might want to change before the rest of the organization does. And so we needed to provide technology solutions for them. So that feedback loop was incredibly important. And Inspire Evolve came out of that desire to be even more intuitive, even simpler, to give customers the ability to make change one step at a time without having to think about deploying something that really it's so expansive that it encourages everybody to be on board at first. We were certainly seeing that there were certain teams within organizations that were on board, certain teams that were just sort of sitting there and saying, well, let's wait and see. So providing an ability for that organization to move forward despite those people that weren't sure was incredibly beneficial for them and as a result for us.
And I think it sounds so easy when you say it. You know, we hear it often. Oh, we need to listen to our customers. We need to build after the needs and and what they're asking for and get review and feedback loops and all this. But in practice, that's difficult. How did you and your team do that? Going from having this more probably complex setup and structure for enterprise customers to then say, actually, we should build something that is a little bit less complex and or more simple. How because I would assume that also takes a bit of a mindset shift in the way that you go about building products and the way you serve your customers.
It can do. At Quadient, we're really fortunate in that we aren't a fly-by-night company. We're not a small company. We're listed on the French stock exchange. We're actually 100 years old this year in our oldest form, back into the mailing hardware side of things. So we've got the ability to do two things at once. In that sense, we could give the customers choice. We recognized that there were customers that would still want the Inspire Flex side of things, that would still want the big enterprise deployment, not just because it suits them, but because it's incredibly valuable for them. But there were also customers that would want to work differently. So by giving the customers choice and by saying we've now got both, and they're both fully supported, they're both being pushed forward with a huge amount of product innovation, we were able to do a little bit of a mindset change in our organization, but we didn't have to say all of that previous way of thinking is now wrong. You now need everyone in our company to think a very different way. We were able to just say, no, we just need to expand our thinking. And as customers over time will change further, we will expand and change again. If there's a point where nobody wants a particular thing, then we'll look at decreasing our scope. But until then, we're able to cope with all of it.
Communications and the way that customers interact and would like to use these different tools to enhance their workflows. Where do you see that customers or people fail or fall short when it comes to communication?
Yeah, it's fair to say that communication has changed more in the past 20 or so years than it has in the previous 200 years. The digital transformation revolution has really driven a lot of that. And there's been, as a result, a lot of mistakes made. The biggest problem I think we have now across the world is that businesses see digital communication as a way of reducing cost, not as a way of increasing engagement. And when cost reduction is the primary driver, rather than customer engagement, the customer experience can suffer. The way that I always try and encourage our customers to think is, how can you use technology to improve the experience, to really transform the way that you engage with customers and create a level of trust that you didn't even have before? Because let's face it, everybody needs to communicate. You can't do anything if you're not communicating with everyone, whether that's as simple as sending an invoice or as complicated as answering a question that might be multifaceted. So how do you use your communications to do that? One of the studies that we did internally and the information we got back was that a lot of people are trying to transform the customer experience, but they're doing it in isolation. They're not thinking about communications. Communications are still sitting in the operations departments. Customer experience is over here. And yet 60 to 80% of all of the touch points that a business has with its customers are in a written format of some sort. Maybe that's a traditional letter, maybe it's an SMS, a chat message, whatever it might be, but they fall under those communications banners. By doing them in isolation, you're not actually able to really transform the customer experience. You've got one group here that cares about engagement. You've got one group that cares about cost. If we can bring them together, and that's why Quadient really shines, the organization can really move through the rankings very quickly when it comes to both of those areas.
Mm. How do you see that companies are bringing those two areas closer together?
I think to answer the question, we have to sort of go back in history a little bit and do a bit of a history lesson, because you're talking about a cultural transformation, but the problem is actually based in technology. You think about communications, we started with print. And back in probably the 1970s, some of the very first things that were automated by these brand new computers that were coming in was reporting, was customer reports. And you think about regulated industries, that could be invoices, it could be bills, it could be statements, those sort of things. And there was a big in-house solution built by these new programmers to do that. And that pretty much stayed the same through to the late 1990s, when third-party technology started to become useful. And people would build solutions that had graphical interfaces rather than COBOL front ends that would allow people to do those same print things. And then email arrived. But email wasn't really used by everybody in the same way in first instance. Email was more of a marketing tool. So it was bought by the marketing team to send really interesting sales messages out. Nice and simple, a technology third-party platform sat on top of marketing that would create a nice glossy front end. And then SMS came out shortly afterwards and became a bit of a notification platform. But SMS is only 100 and something characters. So everyone had to go up building that in-house, because how hard could it be? Then they realized that actually personalizing things can be incredibly difficult. So they left the one that they'd already built that maybe only one business line was using, and then bought another platform. But that was only used by one particular business line. And then it didn't meet the needs of that second business line that needed it, or the third business line. So they bought a different SMS platform. And then all of a sudden, someone needed more of a transactional email notification because they realized these SMSs worked. But actually, not everybody had a mobile phone at the time, early 2000s. So they bought another email platform because marketing didn't want to let go of their platform. So all of a sudden, we've got an in-house print platform, a third-party print platform, 2 email platforms, an in-house and 2 third-party email SMS platforms. Then WhatsApp came along. Then smartphone push notifications, mobile banking and mobile platforms, digital platforms that were on the internet. All of a sudden, you've got this situation where to communicate with someone, your message is entirely dependent on the technology and the team that runs it. And so you're in a position where, in order to get a message out across every platform, what might seem like a very simple business request, change that line here, add this variable in so we can show the customer how much money they've got left in their account, or when their renewal is, or what their bill total is, suddenly requires hundreds of thousands of euros and an entire budget to deal with things. So you end up with people trying to create workarounds, and you get a marketing team that goes their way and says, I'm not paying for that, and that's too complicated, it requires too many IT people, so they build their own thing. And you have a digital team that say, we'll just do our own thing, we'll just have our own smartphone push platform. And then you've got a team that is historically rooted in operations, that's dealing with the servicing of customers, that is trying to deal with whatever's left over. And you just end up with this mess. The way I always describe it, probably to really bring it home to our customers, is if I asked them to name me their CRM platform or their ERP platform, they could give me a name. They may not talk about it in glowing terms, but they give me the name of the platform. If you asked about the communications platform, they would give me, depending on which department they were in, one of any whole plethora of names. We've seen 25 different communication platforms in play at a single organization.
Wow.
While ever you have that plethora of live platforms that are dependent on different channels that have their own limiting factors, you can't collaborate. You need that technology to support your cultural transformation. So you've got to try and bring all of those together and just say, right, what have we got? How can we get rid of all of this mess and provide one solution to service our customers? Yes, a different solution to service marketing, because marketing has very different needs. But when it comes to the customer's life cycle, once they've bought the product, how do we have one solution? And as a result, you end up with one message rather than one team that has one message. And then by the time it gets to the customer, it's gone through so many phases of, well, we can't do that for this platform. We can't do that with this technology, or we don't have this much resource to be able to do things, or our priorities aren't the same. Just don't have the budget. That it's almost like a game of telephone The team that is trying to transform the culture around the customer says one thing, but the message the customer receives is nothing like it. Can't fix that with that current state.
I guess also there is the consistency in front of your customer as well, because if you have multiple teams using multiple different tools and their own specific agenda or focus or goal for that communication, you might also end up with a misalignment across the whole organization on when and what we're speaking or sharing or telling the customer at certain phases. So I guess also there's something about consistency and showing up as one company and having one consistent voice with that customer.
Absolutely. You look at it from a regulatory perspective for a second, from accessibility. We've got the European Accessibility Act coming in very, very soon. All communications will need to be accessible by people who are partially sighted and non-sighted. That means digital screen readers and things like that. If you've got one solution, then you know whether you're compliant or not, and you know how to fix it. But what's likely to happen is right now in a lot of different businesses, there are different teams scrambling around, some of them saying, yeah, we're compliant. And some of them saying, I have no idea how to make this thing compliant because it just doesn't have the capabilities. You think about those partially sighted or those non-sighted customers today. What sort of experience are they receiving? In that consistency, they know that for one particular product or in one particular area, they have no problem at all. In other areas, they're scrabbling just to understand the basic message. So yeah, it can be incredibly difficult when you're trying to get that consistency. It also becomes a real problem when you get that ultimate workaround to all these sort of things, which is Microsoft Office. Our enterprise solutions just don't work. We need something quickly, write it out in Word, or send an email or whatever it might be. At that point, you're entirely reliant on the consistency generated within your contact center teams, within your back office teams, to use templates, to not change things that they shouldn't. And that can cause all sorts of other problems around regulatory fines and things like that, because the likelihood is you didn't employ your back office people for their ability to be consistent in writing communications. In many cases, organizations didn't even employ them for their ability to spell correctly. So you can end up with a whole world of pain by not being consistent in those areas, by not having that technology that underpins that transformation that you're trying to deal with. Ultimately, technology will not transform things for you, but it can stop you from transforming that cultural change to give that customer experience benefit and that engagement change that you're trying to look for.
And I'm keen to hear from you, Andrew, what the experience or observations or what you've seen in the market, that internal political challenges as well, because often it's about who owns what, and then someone has a bit of power per se. I think from a marketing perspective, there's been the shift from marketing owning their marketing technology to now, in many instances, is being moved over to the technical part of the business. What's your take on that?
For me, I don't mind who owns anything as long as it meets the needs of the business. And the problem when it comes to internal politics is when you've got one team owning something and trying to say that it's perfectly fine when another team is not being served by that group. And that's where you find those workarounds, they start to kick in. So that can be from an ownership perspective of, we want to do this particular channel, but the technology platform that we're no longer in charge of can't do it. So we're just going to go away and buy another platform and do it ourselves. And you just add to the cost, you add to the mess of the organization. It can also be where an organization is responsible for part of that process. So in one of my previous lives, I was responsible for bringing down the cost of communication, but I wasn't responsible for what went into the communication or the decisions that were made on what channels were used. So ultimately, it's about sharing a vision. In that case, you've got to be able to show that everybody is going to be better as a result. If you're bringing in technology that compromises, if you're bringing in technology that limits people, or if you're in charge of technology that is limiting people, there's a real tendency to try and defend yourself. But that comes back to one of those big learnings that I've sort of taken from my career is that arguing to win an argument is often diametrically opposed to getting to the right solution. Always listen to the right people, because if you're trying to listen and get to the right solution, not to the one that defends your position, then your organization will be better at the end of it. Ultimately, there's a cultural change there as well that's required. That's a leadership change. It's a mind shift at the top level to stop trying to build empires, to stop trying to work within silos and think that your way is the best, and have your company's best interests at heart. That can be really difficult to do, even at a subconscious level.
Yeah. And do you have any lessons or observations from best practice out there from going from this journey where we have a clutter of different tools and opportunities out there to embed new solutions or technologies to enhance experiences and communication and so on. But then now we're in the position where we have too much and too many teams having their own agendas and activations happening. To streamline those workflows and streamline the communications and customer experience to succeed as one coherent organization in front of your customers. Have you seen any use cases of best practice, and what advice would you give to our listeners when they're looking at this and decluttering, I suppose, their own communication channels and tech stack?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of learnings in this area. Staying away from the Quadient sales pitch for a moment. I guess in a hopefully reasonable order. The first one is to understand that you're going to make change. You're going to try and break things. It's inevitable, right? We can't make change while staying where we are. And some people will want to come along with you on that change, and others will resist you. Your job is to motivate everybody to make that change, but also be willing to let people move in different directions if they don't want to go. Not everybody likes change. Some people really, really relish on it, really sort of thrive on it, and they love that change. Other people will look at it as a threat. Your job is to motivate, but ultimately there comes a point where you have to say, okay, I've done everything that I can. I've got enough people on board to make this change happen. I have to look at what happens to the rest of the people. How do we make them understand this? How do we get them on board? Or how do we actually put them in roles that aren't going to stop this from happening? Because ultimately, you need to be focused to make this happen. Compromise kills change. And by compromise, I don't mean we wanted to go down this route and someone suggested a better way, and actually we're going to switch to it. That's fine. That's just listening to feedback and moving in the right way. Compromise is where someone says, I want this, and we've agreed to go that way. And then someone says, I want this over here. And you try to do the middle path that doesn't really exist. Because as soon as you've compromised and lost that focus, you end up with a solution that doesn't really work. Again, in my previous life, many years ago, we put one of the first digital solutions in place. We spent an enormous amount of money building this digital omni-channel platform, but the business leaders didn't want to go with it. And the plan was we made 400 of these different communications from across the business compliant with this omni-channel rule. And because we compromised and we compromised and we compromised at the business level, we ended up making 2 work. And so in the end, we got a great technology platform because we built this new future-facing thing, but we didn't meet the business outcome that was required.
Yeah, moving further away from the original purpose, I suppose.
We hadn't brought the business along with it. We compromised on their ideals. We'd ended up with this wonderful platform that was actually then reused a few years later when everyone was on board. But yeah, but by not bringing everyone on board and just plowing ahead regardless, and not being willing to make that change to bring in people who were going to support the change, the project as a result failed. And it only succeeded eventually almost by chance, because in the end, the people that were blocking it moved into different roles. and the new people that came in said, why don't we do this weird and wonderful thing, like, making things available on all channels? They had no idea that it had failed previously, and we were able, from a technology perspective, to say, there you go, it's all ready. You just need to do your bit up front. So it can be a real blocker. The other thing, though, from making things work from an internal perspective, is that leadership will make or break that project. You have to have inspirational leadership there. And that inspirational leadership has to show that there will be a benefit to everybody. And it's not just, hey, I stand to make a load of money off this. Do you fancy helping? That only really works when everybody sees that there's something in it for them. So in order to motivate, don't just motivate from the perspective of, hey, you're my friend, will you help me? Motivate from, this is going to help you as well. It's going to help you get promoted. It's going to help your business. It's going to help your customers to feel like they want to do more business with you. Otherwise, you just end up with one person driving things forward and everyone else is just going, you know what, given the opportunity, I'm going to do something else. Or even subconsciously, I'm just going to block this by doing nothing. All of those things stop change. The best way around all of that, if you can, is build from the line of business upwards. Have the vision, but don't look at the vision as the whole company's got to change at once. Look at it from the perspective of, yes, I can see the benefits for the company, but I'm just going to engage this one team to start with. I'm going to show them the vision of the future. I'm going to implement it for them. And I'm going to use the successes from that team to go and engage the next team and the next team and the next team. As long as you've got a technology platform underneath that underpins it, that doesn't need to change when the second team's requirements come in, the third team's requirements come in, you're off to a great start there.
I think that's a really good point, because then, take that first step as well with a pinch of scalability as you move through the organization.
Yeah. But just make sure that you can keep that focus, that underlying vision isn't something that's going to weave all over the place as you go into the second team, the third team. You need to understand what's going to work for everybody up front, even if you don't need to engage them, because otherwise you end up with those compromises. You end up with that position where you've bought great technology for one business team and then actually it doesn't work for the second one. So you've sort of use it, but then you need to buy another platform and then another one, another one. And in trying to simplify and trying to bring things together, you just take old platforms out and put lots of new platforms in. You end up in the same mess at the same time.
And Andrew, as we are switching gears a bit towards the end of our conversation, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the future with when it comes to customer experience and communication and the way we use different technology platforms to enhance that relationship. Where do you see we will be in 5 years from now?
5 years from now? Well, the world's changing rapidly. And I guess the one business buzzword that I have to mention, we've not even talked about it yet, which we've got a long way into a recording without mentioning those two letters that everyone's talking about. But we have to talk about AI and generative AI as well. And I think what we'll see over the next 5 years will be AI supporting human-centric interactions and human-centric connections. It won't be AI taking over. AI is great. We've all used ChatGPT, right, for helping us with a blog entry or writing a skeleton for something or whatever it might be. But nobody's going to risk generative AI of any sort communicating directly with customers in a way that doesn't have any human oversight. Great example, we ran our user conference, was it last year, the year before, where we wanted to invite an expanded group of people. So we asked AI to just give us some marketing brief to put in an email to invite these people. And we had two different groups and we gave exactly the same prompt. And I was asked to review the content. And the first prompt, the first group came back and I think I changed 2 words just to make it a little bit more personalized. In the second one, exactly the same prompt, the AI had forgotten to mention the name of the event. It had forgotten to mention the dates of the event, and it had forgotten to mention that the customer was invited. We can't, from a human-centric perspective, that's fine, because I was being asked to review it. From an AI taking over the world of communication perspective, that's far too risky.
Yeah.
We've all seen the high-profile failures around, different retail examples. In a regulated environment, in big business, can't afford that. Mm-hmm. And with the EU AI Act coming in, that says that every single time you send something out to the customer that is generated purely by AI, you have to announce it very clearly. I think that will shape things further. Nothing says we don't care about you more than a line at the bottom of every communication that says, by the way, we just didn't care about you. We just let the computer decide something. So that's probably a long-winded way of saying that AI, I think, will be there to support humans or make things easier. When it comes to those personalized communications that we all aim for, AI will help to make sure that the content really resonates with those customers. It will help to make sure that the people that design those communications can do it so much quicker, so much better, so much more fluently, and so much more accurately as well, because AI can really help. But there will still be human eyes over the top of it, and I think that's a good thing, because human beings are far more able to deal with the more complex situations that humans find themselves in, especially in those really sensitive areas around customer experience. So I think, that's going to be a very, very positive thing. It's certainly something at Quadient we are working heavily towards. There's already a huge amount of AI in our solutions. Every 2 months, we're releasing more and more capabilities in there, but doing it in a way that supports people rather than takes over from people.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important. And as we're wrapping up, we could continue. This is so exciting. And I wanted to hear, as we're wrapping up for today, I wanted to hear what leaders or people out there, thought leaders, are you following that you see or challenging your perspective and help you look beyond?
Yeah, it's a difficult one for me because I'm really a social media Luddite. I try not to be on the social media channels and see what people are doing. But I do like people who sort of buck the trend, who do things differently. And probably the person that I sort of inspires me the most has been someone called Anne Bowden. Anne was the daughter of, I think, a steel worker and a department store worker in Wales. She's tiny, not the sort of person who has like an imposing presence that you would see physically on stage. And she went on and founded a bank. And you just look at, say, okay, well, this is someone who's bucked the trend. This is someone who's said, I want to do things differently in every single way. And she founded, I think it was called Possible Money originally, and became Starling Bank in the UK, an incredibly successful and incredibly profitable bank now. But I love people like that don't just say, well, it's got to be done this way because everyone else has already done it that way. One of Anne's founding principles was that it's got to be different. It's got to work for the customer. It's got to work for everybody, really, rather than just be a money-making machine for the bank. And she found, as a result of trying to effectively make customer engagement the goal, she found that money comes as the reward. A real success story in those particular areas. So yeah, if anyone wants to take a look, her book's probably just out of shot over here. It's called Banking on It, how she launched an entire bank against the collective wisdom of everyone and made it successful.
Great, Andrew. And just as we're wrapping up, any final words you want to share, any lessons, tips you want to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
There's so many things, but yeah, I guess to wrap up, just customer experience is a really huge area. It's an area that everyone aims for, but don't forget about the fact that customer experience isn't just a channel. It's not just a team. It's something that everybody needs to deal with and that the customer cares about across the whole organization. That means you've got to care about the way that you connect with your customers and the communications that you have with them. Don't just focus on the easy bits. Focus on actually dealing with what the customer really needs. And as long as you focus on putting the customer first in every situation, the money will come. The moment that you focus on the money as a priority, then you're going to end up compromising that experience. So focus on the experience, on the engagement, on the connection with the customer, and it will build you that sustainable competitive advantage that you're always looking for.
I think that is a brilliant way to wrap up. Andrew, I really appreciate your time here and so many nuggets in there, and I'm sure it's going to be valuable for all the listeners. So thank you again so much for joining the Pantrium podcast.
No problem at all. It's been great fun.
If this episode gave you something to think about, I'll be really grateful if you could share this with your LinkedIn network. And to make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes, simply follow Pantrium wherever you are listening or watching. And just a note, the opinions and views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily represent the businesses they work for. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.